They called her the Ash Bride, scarred, unwanted, a token sent to a ruthless king. But when she lowered her veil, destiny changed forever. The fire had taken everything, her family's manner, her girlhood laughter, even her reflection. Illyra learned to count her life not in years, but in scorch marks, in the way cloth snagged along the pale ridge that curved from the hinge of her jaw down her throat, disappearing beneath the collar of any gown that dared show skin, in how the morning light found her hair and turned it to ember, and how that same light found her scar and made strangers look twice. They called her Ash Bride, though no vows had ever been spoken in her name. The village had a talent for names that didn't belong to them: widow, witch, burden. Illyra wore them in silence, because silence was lighter than anger and far less costly. She should have died that night. She remembered a beam collapsing, a wall splitting like bread torn by rough hands, a man's laugh that turned to a scream, a flash of her father's face, not fear, not love, something colder, calculation. Then the world went white, and in the white she learned to crawl. Illyra crawled out of the manor and into a smaller life. She wore hoods and veils and the posture of someone who takes up as little space as a human body can. Her hair, light red, not the fierce copper of storybook heroines, but the softer hue of autumn leaves. She kept braided back. It caught fire in candlelight. Her eyes remained, warm brown and steady, the only part of her that had not changed. People said they were too calm, which was how people described eyes that had already seen the worst and stayed. Years made the scar pale. Years made Illyra quiet. She managed the crumbled estate as if she were stitching a torn hem, stringing coin where she could, dividing grain with a care that bordered on prayer. Her father railed against loss. Her stepmother rehearsed the old story. That beauty was a currency Illyra had squandered by failing to get out of a burning house quickly enough. Illyra learned not to answer stories that had already decided their endings. Then the road filled with iron. The first sound was distant, a low drum like weather rolling over the ridgeline. Chickens scattered, children ran to fences, then ran away again when they saw the banners. The iron marches sent their king with a scarlet field and black wolf sigils, with riders whose boots pressed patterns into the mud that villagers would step around for days, as if the very prince might bite. Veynar came at their head. King, warlord, titles clung to him like frost to a fur collar. He rode as if the road were a sentence he was finishing. Dark brown hair pulled back in a warrior's knot, loosened by wind at the temples, eyes the color of storm-wet bark. The stories said his gaze could pin a man where he stood, that his voice turned threats into treaties and pride into silence. Illyra had never believed stories. She believed what she could count in her hands. Still, when he dismounted in the ruined courtyard, even her breath obeyed him and held. He walked the wreckage without a word. The hinge of his jaw flexed once at the south wing, the place the wind still mourned. He touched nothing, but Illyra felt as if he'd set his palm to the house's ash-hot heart. The men at his back stood easy but watchful, soldiers who had learned to be part of their king's shadow. They gathered in the hall the fire had spared. Its stones held smoke in their memory. The tapestries hung like tired sentries. Her father had ordered the long table relaid with the thin pretense of abundance, pewter polished to a false shine, decanters filled with the last of a good year's wine, bread torn into generous-looking hunks to disguise how little remained. Illyra stood near the pillar farthest from the high seat, veiled, hooded. A blade of winter sun slid through the cracked window and laid a bar of brightness across the flagstones. She placed one boot just outside it, as if refusing light were a kind of right she had earned. Veynar took the high seat as if it had been hewn to fit him. No slouch, no swagger. Authority that did not need to be performed. When he spoke, the hall learned that all its drafts and creaks were lesser sounds. "Your lands sit between my marches and the eastern passes," he said. Bandits take what my supply lines carry. Treaties rot. I am here to decide whether rot can be cut away. Her father bowed, the shape that flattered power, but kept the spine intact. Majesty, he said, we are loyal subjects. Our misfortunes, he gestured toward the broken south wall, a practiced flourish that made ruin look like a narrative, have bled us nearly dry. Tribute is difficult. Tribute, Veynar repeated, tasting the word as if deciding whether to keep it. His gaze moved across the table, past the false abundance, past the frightened servants. It did not stop where Illyra stood, not yet. Her stepmother leaned close to her father. Illyra did not hear the whisper, but she knew its shape. She had been hearing that whisper for years. My king, her father said, straightening. We have little coin and less grain, but we have something of value, and I offer it to prove our loyalty. He lifted one hand, a showman conjuring out of air. My daughter. The hall breathed once, sharply. Illyra did not flinch. Her body had been rehearsed for this long before the moment arrived. The veil hid the scar, the hood hid the hair that betrayed her in any light. The pillar at her back was cool. She felt its truth. Stone did not lie. Take her, her father said, in a voice polished to piety. Let her be your bride if you dare. If not, then judge us on the offering nonetheless. This was the part where men laughed. It was the part where eyes went cruel to keep from going kind. The role had been written for Veynar long before he walked onto this stage. Her father's wager that the warlord would refuse the insult and he could claim he had tried. He did not laugh. He rose. The chair's legs rasped the flagstone like a drawn breath. He was taller than Illyra had expected, not by inches but by presence, a man made broader by the weight he carried without complaint. The iron of his cuirass caught the thin sun and turned it blade bright. He came down from the dais and across the hall, the hush around him deepening until the servants' hands went still above the bread. He stopped 2 arm lengths away, close enough that Illyra could see the fine cuts on his knuckles, the old nick at his jawline, the way a scar curved under the edge of his collar. Small, not meant for show. The kind a man forgets to mention because he has so many others. Look at me, he said, honed to see, not to humiliate. Illyra obeyed, her chin rising. Remove your veil, he added, voice level and public. I look into the eyes of those I address. Show me the manner of the woman who stands before me. Illyra's hands did not tremble. She lifted the veil away. Gasps moved the length of the hall like a fire finding dry kindling. A servant's spoon struck a bowl. Her stepmother's hand flew to her throat. Illyra kept her chin level. She had had years to practice being seen for the worst of her. Veynar's gaze did not slide away. He did not search for a better angle, a kinder light. His eyes, deep brown, steady, took in the scar's curve, the way it thinned at her collarbone, the faint shine where healed skin met the tender hollow above her heart. He looked as a mason might look at a wall that had held through an earthquake, assessing, respecting, already considering what could be built because it had not fallen. He lifted one hand. Every soldier behind him tensed, not at threat, but at the intimacy of it. He did not touch her, not quite. His palm hovered above the scar's arc as if heat might rise from it still. How old? He asked softly. 4 years, Illyra said. The first word she had spoken in his presence tasted like water after a long drought. And you lived. I did. Alone? She thought of the corridor, the beam, the crawl. She thought of her father's eyes. Enough. Something like agreement moved along his jaw, the briefest flex that a lesser watcher would have missed. He turned his head, not taking his eyes from her. I take no bride in shame, he said, louder now, for the hall as much as for her. Scars are not weakness. They are the mark of one who endured. Her father began to speak, some triumphant thread about loyalty, but Veynar's hand cut the air, and the words fell silent. He looked past Illyra to the broken south wall again, then back to Illyra, as if connecting two halves of the same sentence. "I accept," he said. The hall exhaled. Sound returned in thin filaments, the clink of metal, the scrape of a chair, a muffled curse. Illyra's heartbeat steadied into something like marching boots receding. Except they were coming closer, because the life she had used to shield herself was already ending. "To you," he added, and the iron of his voice warmed by a fraction no one else would register, "I offer truth. You are not coin, not proof, not penance. If you stand at my side, it will not be to hide a loss, but to share a rule." The words were impossible, and yet they fit her like a cloak she had not known she'd been cold without. Illyra did not trust them. Not yet. Trust was for people whose houses had not burned while help calculated its price. But something in her, the small, stubborn core that had crawled and risen and learned to count by scorch marks, answered anyway. "Then I will stand," she said. A murmur rippled, half scandal, half astonishment. Her stepmother's mouth shaped a warning. Her father's eyes measured gain. Veynar inclined his head, a soldier acknowledging a soldier. The betrothal was spoken over bread that tasted of dust and wine that had outlived its year. Veynar's men ate with the tidy efficiency of those who understood supplies. Illyra took a single cup and let the warmth rest in her hands. She heard plans being built on the other side of the table, routes discussed, passes counted, the scorch of bandit names. Veynar's voice threaded through it all, even when he was silent, because men defer to gravity even when they do not look at the ground. When the last signature dried, dusk had piled itself against the windows. The road below the manor burned with torches. Veynar stood, and the hall's attention rose with him like birds at a sudden shadow. He did not touch Illyra as he offered his arm. He did not need to. The space he made for her at his side was touch enough, and everyone saw it. In the courtyard, the air smelled of rain, sharp and clean after years of smoke memory clinging to the manor walls. Horses stamped, leather creaked. A young soldier glanced at Illyra's scar and then away, ashamed of his own curiosity. She kept her gaze steady and let him learn from it. Her family came to see her off. Her stepmother pressed a kiss to her cheek, lips cold against skin. Her father gave her words of loyalty and honor, shaped like blessings but hollow inside. Illyra looked once at the ruined south wing, where the wind still sang through broken stone. That was farewell enough. They rode at a measured pace, not the breakneck speed of conquest, but the stride of a king returning with something he meant to keep. Villagers watched from doorways, women with flour on their hands, men with wood smoke in their clothes, children who would tell the story badly and then better, until the facts became a legend. Illyra held herself straight in the saddle. The veil was folded in her lap like an old habit she had decided not to rewrap. Night gathered as they climbed. The road curled like a dark ribbon toward the fortress on the ridge. Veynar's seat, the citadel that had seen more winters than most kingdoms had kings. In moonlight, its towers looked like fingers bent around a flame. "Does it always storm there?" Illyra asked, because the horizon flashed with lightning that did not make a sound. "Often," Veynar said. "Storms remind men they are not the only power. And you like that. I respect it. A beat. You survived one." She did not answer. She could feel the fortress already, a pressure in the chest like standing before a great organ waiting for the first chord. Behind them, the manor shrank into a collection of shadows. She had spent 4 years becoming invisible inside those walls. In the broken south wing, wind still sang the memory of voices. Illyra listened once more, then turned her face forward. At the gate, men saluted with the easy, unadorned respect of soldiers who knew their king and did not need ceremony to prove it. The inner yard smelled of rain on stone, of iron, of wool drying near banked fires. A dog trotted across their path, looked up at Illyra as if cataloguing her, then approved and went on. Approval felt like a strange blessing. Veynar led her through corridors wider than any she'd seen, hung with banners that told a history in crimson and charcoal. The castle's heart thudded in the deep, practical rhythms of a place made for weathering. Not a pretty thing, not a palace, but beautiful in the way a shield is beautiful after you see what it has stopped. He paused before a door framed in old oak. "Your rooms," he said. "No guards posted inside. If you want more, say it. If you want fewer, say that too. You give your prisoners choices? I don't take prisoners into my house." He looked at her then, not as king to subject, but as man to woman, the measure of one scarred life against another. "If you find something lacking, tell me and I'll remedy it. And if I find something I did not know I wanted," his mouth almost bent toward a smile, "then I'll see if it can be found." He left her with a nod. The door shut softly. Illyra stood in a room with a bed that could have held a family, a hearth already set, a basin filled with water that steamed like breath in winter. She set the folded veil on the table and watched it as if it might crawl back on its own. It did not. When she unbraided her hair, it fell in a soft line down her back, catching firelight until even she had to admit it was beautiful. She touched the scar along her jaw. It was cool now, part of her as surely as bone. In the glass, her eyes were steady and brown, the same as the day before the raid, the same as 1,000 mornings after. She had been given a title by people who enjoyed naming what they did not understand. Ash Bride. Tonight, the word felt less like mockery and more like a metal cooling into shape. Beyond the window, lightning stitched a thin seam between two towers. The thunder took its time arriving, a distant promise. Illyra lay down without undressing, as if some part of her still believed sleep could be snatched away. She listened to the fortress breathing. She did not pray. She counted, scorch marks, steps, breaths, until the numbers gave way and the dark took her. She did not know whether she was walking into chains or freedom, only that for the first time since the fire, someone had looked at her not with horror, but with recognition. The thought frightened her more than flames ever had. Morning would bring the court's eyes, the sneer twisted into a smile, the tests spoken like pleasantries. Morning would bring a king who said scars were proof. Illyra did not know if she believed him, but the word he had offered, stand, had lodged under her skin like a seed finding a seam of water. Sleep found her with the veil still folded on the table and the storm walking slowly toward the walls. Dawn broke over the fortress with the hush of a place that had already seen too much blood. The storm had washed the banners clean, and they dripped scarlet and black against the walls like wounds that refused to close. Illyra rose from the great bed with its carved posts and silken coverlets. She had slept only in fragments, waking each time thunder rolled. The veil still lay folded on the table. She left it there. A gown of deep green wool had been set out for her, plain but fine. Beside it, a cloak clasped with the iron wolf of the marches. She touched it, but did not wear it. Cloaks had always hidden her. She would walk uncovered now, though her scar burned at the thought of the court's eyes. The corridors stretched long and gray, echoing with her steps. Soldiers bowed, curious eyes flicking to her scar and then away again. She held herself tall, even as her pulse skittered beneath her ribs. The high hall swarmed with nobles and captains, their voices a low buzz of intrigue. When she entered, conversation dipped to a knife's edge. They looked at her as one might look at a fracture in marble. Fascinating, ugly, unfit for a throne. Veynar sat at the head of the table, shoulders broad beneath dark furs, presence cutting through the whispers. His gaze found her, unflinching. With a single motion of his hand, he beckoned her to the seat at his side. She walked the length of the hall, each step weighed by 100 watching eyes. When she sat, their sleeves brushed. He did not move away. One of the older lords rose, tall and thin, with eyes like a carrion bird. "Majesty," he said with a bow sharpened to insult, "we rejoice at your union, and yet we question the choice. The marches require strength, not pity." His eyes slid to Illyra, lingering on her scar. "A bride marked by fire is no omen for kings." The murmur swelled, a tide of agreement waiting to break. Veynar did not rise. He only leaned forward, the weight of his gaze enough to silence the room. "You mistake survival for pity," he said, his voice like steel hammered flat. "She has endured fire, ruin, and betrayal, and still she stands. Tell me, which among you has scars enough to show you have done the same?" The Lord faltered, and the silence that followed was louder than applause. Another voice slid in from further down the table, Lady Maylene, the High Steward's sister, her smile smooth as oil on water. "Endurance is admirable, Majesty, but queens must also be unifying." Her gaze made a neat circle of Illyra's face, pausing deliberately at the scar. "Some sights unsettle the countryside. Then the countryside will learn what strength looks like," Veynar said without looking at her. A scribe cleared his throat, brave or foolish. "There is the matter of tribute, Majesty. The eastern passes drain men, and the winter stock is thin. The southern vassals claim bandits have taken their grain. If the king's new household demands more, my household will not demand what the marches cannot spare," Veynar said. "We will take what is owed and give what is needed." His gaze moved to Illyra, not for show, but as if her presence were part of that arithmetic. "Begin with the riders posted at Garl Pike. Rotate them home in tens. Replace them with men from the north garrisons. They're fresh, and the road is less exposed from that side. And send word to the southern vassals. The king will see their ledgers himself." The scribe bowed and scuttled. Illyra felt a prickle of unease at the mention of the south. She knew those fields. She knew who claimed them. After the council broke, the courtiers formed their constellations of gossip. Illyra stood from the table and kept walking until the hum of voices thinned to the steady rhythm of her footsteps down the colonnade. The clang of steel rang against stone in the practice yard. Veynar sparred with his captains, their blades a flurry of measured violence. He fought with brutal grace, each stroke economical, his body a map of old battles. When at last he saw her, he handed his blade to a soldier and crossed to where she stood. "You should know the yard," he said. "A queen who cannot defend herself is a pawn for braver hands." "I am not a warrior," she answered, lifting her chin. "You survived fire," he said. "That is more than some warriors endure." He picked up a wooden sword and held it out. She hesitated. His eyes stayed on hers, patient, steady, and she took it. His hands covered hers for a moment, adjusting her grip. His palms were rough, scarred, warm. Heat licked through her chest at the contact, and she hated that he saw the flicker of it in her eyes. He stepped back. "Again," he commanded after her first clumsy swing. And again, until her arms ached and her breath came fast. He did not mock. He corrected. Each time his voice was steady, and she felt the strange weight of respect growing where she had expected derision. Between drills he spoke, not idly, but the way a man lays foundation stones. In the marches, scars are marks of truth. They tell a warrior he has been tested and lived. My father wore them proudly. My mother bore one along her ribs that saved her life when a raider's blade glanced off bone. He called it the bravest line he ever traced with his hand. Illyra exhaled. For the first time, she saw her scar not as ruin, but as language, and Veynar spoke it fluently. When her arms trembled and the wooden blade felt like iron, he lowered his own practice sword and studied her. "The lord who mocked you, the one with the carrion eyes, owes half his harvests to southern caravans that curiously never reached the passes. He is loyal to his coin, and to anyone who keeps it heavy, that scent is strong in this court. And what do you smell on my father?" The question surprised her as much as him. She watched his face for the slightest flinch. Veynar's expression did not change. "I smell a man who believes himself clever. That is the edge of a thin blade. It cuts the hand that holds it more often than the throat it seeks. You think he—" The words jammed in her chest. She saw the corridor again, the beam splitting, her father's eyes cold and calculating, as if measuring what could be salvaged. "I think you survived without him," Veynar said. "And I think men who gamble with lives seldom stop after one wager." A horn called from the western tower. On the far side of the yard, soldiers shifted, the current of readiness moving through them like wind through winter grass. Veynar's gaze cut toward the sound, then returned to her with a softer edge. "Enough for today. There will be ceremony tonight. If you require anything for your comfort, tell the steward. Tell me." "The cloak," she said, before she could stop herself. "It's too much. I won't wear a wolf I haven't earned." Something like approval moved along his mouth. "Then don't. Wear your own name." By twilight, the fortress glowed like an ember. Torches flamed along the walls. Banners stirred as if breathing in sleep. Servants swarmed the great hall with loaves and wheels of cheese and haunches spitted over coal. The air tasted of rosemary and smoke, and wine warmed with cloves. Illyra stood before the war priest beneath the wolf banners. The priest's hair was iron gray, braided close to his skull. He wore no jewels. An iron ring hung from his belt, and on its face a notch had been chiseled for every vow he had bound. When he spoke, it was not theatrics, but liturgy carved down to its bones. Her father had come, dressed in his finest, pride slicking his smile. His eyes slid past her scar as though it belonged to someone else. She remembered the look he had given her the night of the fire. It lived in his gaze still. Next to him, her stepmother dabbed staged tears with a lace kerchief and did not meet Illyra's eyes. The court pressed close, sharp with perfume and malice. Lady Maylin leaned against a pillar like a thin knife and watched. The vows began, ancient words spoken before the gathered host. Illyra's heart pounded. She felt the sneers like nettles against her skin. When the priest turned to her, Veynar reached without hesitation and clasped her scarred hand. He raised it high, scar and all, for every eye to see. The hall fell silent, as if the torches had leaned closer to listen. "This hand endured fire," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters. "And by enduring, she proved what it means to rule the marches. Let no man or woman call her less. She is queen, not because I claim her, but because she survived." Gasps broke the silence, followed by a shifting of power too subtle to name. Illyra felt the heat of every gaze, but also the weight of something new. Awe. The priest placed the iron ring in Veynar's hand, and Veynar slid it over Illyra's finger. The metal was cool, perfectly sized, as if someone had measured her in her sleep. Her lips were dry as she whispered the vow, "I will stand at your side." The words shook, but they were hers, and when she met his gaze, she saw approval, not triumph, not conquest, but something steadier, like recognition. The feast rose around them in a roar. Drums pounded, men banged cups against tables, women laughed too loudly, their bracelets chiming like small bells. A bard sang an old war song about a bridge of spears. Trenchers came and went, meat steaming, grease glossing the firelight. Illyra ate little. She heard the whispers weaving through the noise, felt the stares prick her skin, but she also saw the way soldiers glanced at her differently now. Some with respect, some with unease. Her father found her between toasts, his smile as polished as a doorknob. "Daughter," he said, tasting the word as if it might be valuable. "How resplendent you look." His eyes flicked to her ring. "A fitting union. The marches are wise to embrace our house." "Are they?" Illyra said. His gaze hardened a fraction. "A wise woman does not embarrass her kin." "A wise man does not wager his kin," she said, too quiet for anyone else to hear, and watched color flood his neck. Veynar's shadow moved, and her father stepped back the distance of a bow. Veynar did not address him. He addressed Illyra as if the other man were furniture. "Walk," he said softly. "You've endured enough stale air." They left the heat of the hall for the open terrace. Wind carried the clean chill of stone and the faint sweetness of the herb garden clinging to the inner court. Below, the yard stirred with changing watch. Above, stars pricked the dark like nails hammered through velvet. "Do you regret?" Veynar asked, his voice quiet, the torches throwing bronze across his cheekbones. She thought of the scar, the whispers, the vows spoken before wolves and traitors. She thought of her father's smile, slick with secrets. "I fear," she admitted. "Fear is wise," Veynar said. "Only fools wed without it." He leaned his forearms against the parapet and looked out over the roofs and shadows. "When I took the crown, men who called themselves my uncles sent me wine with a snake in it and letters with words coiled like worse snakes. Betrayal does not always come with torches. Sometimes it wears a family crest." Illyra's breath snagged. "And what does it wear now?" "In this court, polite smiles and clean ledgers." He touched the stone with his knuckles as if knocking once to test the fortress's bones. "We will look at those ledgers. Not to embarrass your kin, Illyra, to feed the marches. But when we do, truths will surface. Steel yourself." "I am tired of steel," she said, surprising herself again with honesty. "I want something softer that doesn't break." "Soft things endure too," Veynar said, and only then did he glance at her scar, and only for a heartbeat. "They bend, they do not shatter." Servants approached with a small procession, a black lacquered chest, a cushion bearing a narrow circlet of dark iron, a stool. The steward bowed. "Majesty, the Queen's token." Illyra stiffened. "I can't wear a crown I have not earned." "This is not a crown," Veynar said. "The marches keep their finery for winter festivals and truce courts. This is a circlet worn by a warland's mistress when she sits judgment in the king's stead. It marks service, not ornament." He nodded to the steward. The man lifted the circlet and placed it in Illyra's hands. It was heavier than it looked, carved with a pattern of interlocked wolf tracks. Inside, small scratches marred the metal. Lived in, not pristine. "When you are ready," Veynar said, "you will wear it to hear petitions. Not today. Soon." He paused. "If you choose." "I choose to stand," she said, the words steady this time. "You heard me." "I did." He reached, not for her face, not for her scar, but for the folded veil she still carried tucked into her belt, as if it were habit, not intention. He took it between two fingers and lifted it, weighing the cloth against the wind. "Do you keep this as memory or shield?" "Both," she said. "Then keep it for memory." He released it, and the veil did not fall. Her hand had already closed over it. A small smile ghosted the edge of his mouth. "Good." A runner clattered across the terrace stones, breath ragged, fist to heart. "Majesty." A rider from the south, broken, he begs audience. Veynar straightened. "Bring him." To Illyra. "You may go. This will be ugly." "I will stay," she said. They met the rider in a side hall beneath a guttering torch. He was young, clothes torn by thorns and speed, blood dried in a spray across one sleeve. He knelt hard enough that his breath broke. "Majesty, the convoy from Garl Pike, taken, the wagons burned, men missing." "Bandits?" the steward snapped. The rider shook his head. "They wore lordly colors, covered with mud, but we scraped them. South March green over silver." Illyra's stomach dropped. South March green was her father's vassal color. It was also the color of 3 neighboring houses who owed her father favors, and a 4th who owed him a debt. Veynar's jaw did not move. His voice softened, which in him was the sound of steel being wrapped for transport. "You will eat and sleep, and then you will show me the path." To the steward, "Wake the quartermaster. We ride at first light to the wreckage and count what was actually burned. Send word to the southern houses that any man wearing their color on my roads answers to me." The steward bowed and vanished with the flurry of a man who knows where everything lives. Illyra leaned against the stone a moment after the others had gone. The cold soaked her bones. "If those colors lead to my father—" "They lead to the march's hunger," Veynar said. "We will follow them without forgetting whose banners hang over which fields." "You will not spare him because he is my blood," she said. It should have sounded like a question. It didn't. "Illyra," Veynar said, and she realized he had not used her name since the hall, had saved it until now, until it mattered. "I will not wound you to wound him, but I will feed my people. If those paths cross, we will walk them carefully. Together." She held his gaze until the air between them felt like a cord pulled impossibly taut. Then she nodded. In the days that followed, the fortress adjusted itself around her like a cloak that had been waiting to be worn. The steward learned she preferred her bread unsweetened and her tea strong. The armory learned to send a lighter practice sword. The laundress learned to ease the neckline of her gowns so that the cloth did not drag across the sensitive edge of her scar. None of it felt like pampering. It felt like being seen by people who expected her to put those small comforts to use in service of larger, heavier things. She sat with Veynar at 2 more councils and learned the faces of men who smiled too much and women who smiled too little. She watched the scribes ink tally routes and names. She listened to Captain Core speak about patrol gaps with the grimness of a man who had buried too many young bodies. When a petition came from a village at the river bend, a miller claiming that a noble had taken their grain at sword point, Veynar tilted his head at her. "Hear it," he said. "Tell me what you would do." Her throat dried. She took the parchment, read the neat, angry lines. "Send a writer," she said, "but not with a letter, with witnesses. Let the noble see he is watched. If he refuses to return grain, take it back from his stores and add a levy in salt." "Why salt?" Veynar asked, not to test but to sharpen. "Because the river will rise soon, and the village will need to preserve what they grind, or their work rots." He didn't smile. His eyes warmed a fraction. "Send it," he told the scribe, "in the queen's hand." When she left the hall, the corridor was quiet except for the lap of firelight along iron brackets. A young page stood outside her door with a folded scrap. "From the Lady Maylene," he said, reluctant. Inside was a single line. "Some scars are worn to win pity, others to hide culpability. Are you certain you survived the right fire? No seal, no signature. The kind of message a coward sends when she wants to bruise without being seen." Illyra held the scrap over the hearth until it curled into blackness and ash, the only ash she allowed near her now. The night before Veynar rode south to look upon the burned convoy, Illyra went to the stables. She found his horse already saddled, head tossing as if impatient for distance. Veynar stood with a bridle over one shoulder, his hair unbound and falling dark around his face. He looked not like a king, but like a man who had never had to remind his body how to move. "You mean to leave me to court wolves?" she said lightly. "These courtiers bared their teeth at you long before they bowed to me," he said, equally light. "Then we will both survive them." She paused. "Bring back truth, Veynar." "I intend to," he said, and there was a promise in it that had nothing to do with ledgers. He mounted. For a heartbeat he looked down at her face, at the line that curved along her jaw, at the iron ring on her finger catching the low light. "Wear the circlet when you hear petitions tomorrow," he said. "Not because I command it, because the people should learn that strength can look like this. He meant the scar, he meant the steadiness, he meant the woman who had crawled out of a burning house and learned to count by scorch marks and now counted by names and roads and sacks of grain. "I will," she said. He rode into the dark with 6 men, and the fortress closed around the echo of hooves. In the morning, Illyra sat the judgment stool beneath the banners, without the cloak, and with the circlet's weight a clean, honest line across her brow. She listened as a farmer complained about a gate that stuck, and a weaver about a husband who drank, and a young soldier about boots that blistered. She sent a carpenter to the gate and a cask of weak beer to the weaver's home and salve to the soldier, and with each small decision, with each measured word, the courtiers who had smirked began to frown in confusion, and the soldiers who had looked away began to look straight at her and nod. By noon, a messenger arrived from the south with a sealed bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The steward cut the wax and laid out a strip of mud-stained fabric on the table before her. Southmarch green over silver, the dye darkened by rain and ash and something like guilt. There were other things in the bundle. Evidence recovered from the convoy wreckage, a ledger page torn from a book she knew well, a hand she recognized without wanting to, her father's. Columns listing tithes lost to bandits year after year, the losses too neat, too even, always the same numbers. Impossible sums that matched no harvest she had ever overseen. Illyra read it once, then again. The words stayed the same. She did not weep, she did not speak. She pressed her palm flat to the table until the grain imprinted her skin. Then she folded the page, slid it beneath the ledger they were building here, and looked up at the steward, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Summon the council at twilight," she said, "and have the war priest stand ready to witness." The steward bowed, not to a girl who had been offered as insult, but to a queen who had decided what to do with a truth that finally had a shape. Illyra has uncovered her father's betrayal in ink. Part 2 will reveal the judgment, so hit the notification bell and be the first to witness the reckoning. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.